Enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussion. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to watch and engage in smart and interesting conversations as they happen. I am very pleased to be in the company of Irv Adler, the president, and Betsy Gephart, the vice president of the Northeast Indiana Jewish Genealogy Society. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
So first of all, let's start with how the two of you, because your backgrounds are very diverse. You know, Irv, as you were explaining to me, your background is very much in tech and business. Mm-hmm. And Betsy, you actually are a musician and you are a member of the Fort Wayne Philharmonic. So I'm curious to know, because the Genealogy Society started in 2018, I'm curious to know how the two of you connected and how the idea just for the Genealogy Society came about.
Well, okay, and Betsy will let me know if I'm heading in the wrong direction. She'll let me know immediately,
okay.
because she's very good at that,
okay,
which is
Betsy,
which is very helpful,
in.
by the way.
Okay.
I might add, because I have a tendency to rattle on.
Okay.
So I don't know exactly the exact time it happened, but I know we knew each other from the temple. Okay, mm-hmm. And I don't know, it was over corned beef one night because we have temple members that get together, or it was some other event, but somehow we were talking about genealogy. And I got to know Betsy over the years because she was doing genealogical research and I had been doing some genealogical research, and we just kept on talking about that. And I'm not sure exactly where the spark came from, but we talked about, about maybe setting up a Jewish genealogy society. Maybe you'll have a better idea of the specifics than I do. But
yeah, I don't remember how we exactly came up with it. But
it was thermodynamics, that's when you have a background in chemistry.
Right. But why? I mean, obviously, Fort Wayne is known for its genealogy center and the research and capabilities. Why did you feel there was a need to have a society, especially in Fort Wayne or Northeast Indiana, which has it has a rich Jewish history, but not so much necessarily a large Jewish population? Why did you think it was important to create a genealogy society that focused just on the Jewish community?
Well, it's different resources in some ways. You have different resources that we wanted to showcase, and we thought there might be an interest among the community. There's more interest in the Jewish community in discovering your roots, and of course, as soon as Irv and I kind of decided that we might want to try this, the first person we talked to was Kurt Witcher, mm-hmm. and he has been. I mean, we couldn't have done this without him.
Tremendously supportive. I mean, that's exactly right. Couldn't have done it without him.
Yeah, mm-hmm. So it was kind of I don't know, it was a happy blending mm-hmm. of those of these three parts, mm-hmm. Because I think it helps the library to branch out a little bit into the Jewish resources, mm-hmm. and it certainly helps us mm-hmm. to be connected with the library. Mm-hmm.
We also have a good set of complementary skills, and we also get along well, which is also helpful. Okay, the three of us got along well immediately. Mm-hmm. And we have different points of views about different things, but mm-hmm. we've always been able to find a common ground mm-hmm. among with not a lot of problems. And Betsy brings a lot of creativity and a lot of technical skills, and I have a lot of experience in managing and organizing and getting things done, and also I'm quite analytical, which mm-hmm. helps. And then Kurt is just very good management skills and tremendously knowledgeable in genealogy.
Yeah,
he's world recognized,
right.
And plus he's the manager of the Genealogical Center. So we were able to bring very complementary mm-hmm. skills, and the three of us got along extremely mm-hmm. well, mm-hmm. and that's still the case.
And Betsy, you mentioned that you thought that there was more of seems to be a larger interest in genealogy in the Jewish community, and why do you think that is?
I mean, I don't know that it's larger than the general community for sure. It's probably not, but it's is a little bit different history. I mean, one of the interesting things you introduced us as being from two different backgrounds,
right.
but genealogically also very much, I think, because Irv was coming at this originally, at least, from the perspective of doing Holocaust research and then branching into his genealogy. And I've been doing genealogy research for 30 plus years, more than that, and I'm always going at it from the diversity of my background. Only half of my family is Jewish, the other half is not. And so completely genealogy-wise, and then eventually got into Holocaust research a little bit. So that diversity, there's I don't know where I was going with that, but that diversity of interest is there in our community here. And also and I think also we had kind of in mind a little bit the Jewish history in Fort Wayne. One of the things that the Genealogy Society does is we're working on, slowly, a Fort Wayne Jewish Families database where we're tracking and recording the information about the historical Jewish community here. And we do have members of the temple and members of the Jewish community here that have family that go back for years and years. So we've gradually started to get some of them, interested in that, and that's kind of our goal. We've got a pretty good membership now because of COVID. We've branched out so that we have members all over the country. I'm not sure we may still have one from Australia, but mostly from.
We have one from Israel.
Yeah, but originally, the goal is really for Northeast Indiana.
But like when you've done, you do a lot of Zoom interviews and you bring in experts. I mean, you've had hundreds of people attend them, and the Jewish community in Fort Wayne is about 400. So we know that they're coming from other places.
Right, for sure.
So what surprised you the most about the creation, when you created the society, and looking back at it now, you're in your third year. What has surprised you the most about that aspect of what you've been doing in the realm of genealogy?
What do you mean specifically?
Like,
the fact we've been successful, or
no, like surprised you, like in terms of, did you come across somebody who really found out something really interesting about their background, or the fact that you do have people from all over the country, or anything, that you were surprised that you didn't expect would happen when you thought about creating this society?
I think it's probably the virtual programs that we ended up having this past year that attracted people from all over the world. I mean, when the first one we did that started getting registrations from Israel and Australia and New Zealand, that was really surprising. Now we bring in some really amazing guests, and our plan is that we've been all virtual for a year now, more than a year, right? I don't remember exactly, but and our November program is going to be virtual again. But starting hopefully in February, we'll be able to get people in person here to the library. But they've been very high quality speakers, and so it's not. When you think about it, it's not completely surprising that people, for a free virtual program, that you get people from everywhere to sign up. But it's more challenging when they're local in-person programs to, we would get, between 30 and 50 people maybe, to come in person.
Right. Well, maybe you can still record them and then offer them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the hope.
Well, we do that for members.
Yeah.
But I think, we've learned a lot from the library too, because they've had virtual programs because they have them on a regular basis. And so they've become very skilled. And fortunately, one of our board members, Samara Sheree, has also become very skilled. So we're able to do this and do a pretty good job on it. And going forward, we're looking at doing hybrids too, because as Betsy indicated, we've attracted, there's interest in what we do. The question is, now we have a delivery platform that allows us to provide this to people who would be interested, but didn't either know about it or
Right.
couldn't access it.
But there's also the idea of, I think that you talk about the delivery platform, which is really technology,
Yeah.
which has really helped to create sort of in the last 20 years this boom of interest in genealogy and finding your ancestors and and now even with your getting your DNA,
Right.
and then they link you up to potential relatives, and so I think technology has really fostered that. But both of you sort of, I think you had personal interests, like you said, Betsy, you've been doing this for 30 years, and Irv, you really started with this because of something that you discovered in your family.
Right, and
so I want to backtrack and I want to tell a little bit about how you each personally came to genealogy and sort of that experience for you and where you are in your own process. So Irv, let's start with you,
Okay.
because you actually just published a book called Then and Now, which was about
Right.
your family and the research that you started, right?
Right.
So why don't you tell us a story of how you got from where you started to publishing a
Okay.
book?
So first of all, I have pretty good research skills to
Right,
begin with, right?
right.
And I'm generally analytical. But when I started doing this, and I don't know if I still don't consider myself a genealogist. I am not a genealogist, okay? My goal was to I found these letters, and
Now, how did you find these letters? I mean,
They're
let's
in-
start with
in
did
the
they just randomly appear? Were they in the attic?
They almost randomly appear.
Okay.
Okay, so, and it's in the book, describes some little
Right,
history.
but we're gonna
the,
but we
the
don't- we
bottom
don't-
line is that Fran and my wife Fran returned. We took a vacation in Vienna in August 2010.
And that is where your family. That's where
Yeah,
your
my whole family
is
comes
from
my
Vienna.
My family comes from Vienna, but my ancestors come from basically Poland, and they come from Galicia, and what that time was called the Congress of Poland, Warsaw.
Okay.
So this is back. There was a very large migration in Galicia to heading west. Many people came to the United States, but many people they went to Prague, to Budapest, and to Vienna.
Vienna, right.
And that was in the late 1800s.
Right, and Vienna became a very thriving
Right.
cultural arts.
Huge influx of
yeah.
Jews from the east.
Okay.
So that's where my parents that were born there, and some of my grandparents were also born there. So my wife and I knew my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, I know she died in the Holocaust. And I had been told that she had died in Auschwitz, but I didn't know anything, okay? So one day we said we took this vacation to Vienna in August 2010, and as a result of talking to some people, we wound up going to an archive. It's called the Documentation for Austrian Resistance, and we met a person there who was an archivist. Her name was Elizabeth Klampe, and I said to her, I think my grandmother died in Auschwitz, and then she sat behind her computer, and she came up for air about 10, 15 minutes later, and she was white as a sheet, and she said, your grandmother did not die in Auschwitz, she died in a place called Mali Trutzenitz. And most people never heard of Mali Trutzenitz, but it was a death camp in now it's Belarus. And typically, when you went to Mali Trutzenitz, you were either shot, dumped in a ditch, or you put in a gas fan and gas. So, and it turned out that I found this out later. That was the largest single location where Jews from Vienna were murdered.
Okay.
In Mali Trutzenitz.
Okay.
So we found this out.
Okay.
And then we came back from our so-called vacation. It was supposed to be 5 days. Half of it was a vacation. The other half was
Right.
trying to find stuff out.
Okay.
And then I started thinking, well, where can I find out more about
Okay.
this? Okay. And I remembered that my mother had this suitcase, and this suitcase was stuffed with all kinds of stuff about my family. And I would look at it periodically to find things about my parents, historical records. And I said, well, why don't I take a look at that? And that's the suitcase that's pictured on the cover. That is the suitcase. Okay?
Uh-huh.
And I pull out this suitcase.
So where was the suitcase? Like, was it in your attic? Was it in
in
your
a closet somewhere. It was
okay.
like sitting there for 7 years.
Now, was your mother still alive at this time?
No, she passed away in
Okay.
2003.
Okay.
So it had been sitting there for several years, and I would take it out every once in a while if I needed to look at something, but otherwise I didn't pay much attention to it. But I kind of vaguely recall that when I visited my mother back in the late 1990s, she talked about us. She mentioned, she pointed out to something that looked like could have been a pack of letters. Anyway, I mean, I forgot all that. So I pull out this suitcase and I'm start rummaging through it, and I see this really crummy looking plastic package. And I wish I had saved that thing, because that was so crummy looking you had to save it. And I should have taken a photograph of it, but I didn't, because I didn't realize what was in it.
Right.
So I open this thing and I see this package of letters, okay, and it's like a 3x5 index card, all squashed together, and with a pink ribbon on it. So I started peeling these things off, one after another, very carefully, because some of them were very fragile. And it took me a while. I don't know, it took me an hour and a half to do all this, because I was trying to be very careful and not damage it. And there's all these letters.
And who are the letters from?
Well, at that point, I couldn't tell you, because they were written in 2 different penmanship styles.
Okay.
But from what I could tell, a lot of them were written to my. They seemed to be all written to my mother. Okay.
Okay.
And in the letters, there were several authors. There were one author that it turned out to be my grandmother.
Okay.
And as well as other family members.
Now, why were they? Now, you said that your parents were born in Vienna.
Yes.
So did they then? Did they escape the Holocaust and emigrate to the United
Yes.
States? Okay.
My father. He was in Dachau and Buchenwald, but he was there as a slave laborer before it became a death camp,
Okay.
Extermination camp. And he was one of these in 1938, May 1938, as it turns out. The Nazis were picking Jews up from homes and from streets, and they were sending them to Dachau. And then Buchenwald opened, and then he went from Dachau to Buchenwald. So he was in these 2 concentration camps for 11 months. And then in April of 1939, what I've read, basically it was Hitler's birthday. And Hitler had his birthday in April, and for some unknown reason, he was feeling very magnanimous. And at that point, the policy of the Nazi authorities were to get the Jews out of Europe.
Right, they were not right. They didn't create the final solution.
But if they sent them to a labor camp and they happened to drop dead or die,
that was fine.
Hey, that was good.
Right,
okay?
but the intent was at that time was just to get them to go to other
right,
countries. Right, they didn't have the final solution until the early 40s.
So my father had to leave the country. He had to sign a document that said he was never coming back. And then in July, it turned out to be July 4th. It was interesting. He left. He actually was on a ship in Hamburg. He boarded a ship in Hamburg and came to the States.
Okay.
My father and my uncle. My mother. There's something called the Anschluss, which happened in March 1938. That's the annexation of Austria by Germany, and immediately after that, things changed dramatically for the Viennese Jews. What happened in Germany in 5 years happened in like 6 weeks in Vienna. And I cover that in the book. I try to give a little briefing about, you have to understand the circumstances in Vienna.
Right.
And to understand why my mother
But your mother,
decided to leave.
your mother...
Yes. So it turned out that as a result of years and years of interaction between England and the Germanic countries and also Holland, there was a pipeline created, infrastructure for domestic servants. The British domestic servant industry had declined dramatically, and the British were very used to having domestic servants, so they were basically, if you like, importing them from 3 major countries, Holland, there were some other countries too, but mainly the Netherlands, from Germany, and from Austria, because these were hard-working women, and they had good skills, and in the case of the women from Vienna, they were very good cooks. My mother was a fabulous cook. I can tell you right now, I can tell you stories about that. So she was able to leave in September 1938. It happened to be the day she left was the day of her birthday. She got a job as a domestic, and I cover that in the book. And she winds up going to the UK, and she never sees her mother again. That's the end of that story. But they write. They have letters and lots of letters. And the way these letters are written, it's a stream of consciousness. It's just like if you had a telephone call with your family member, and you talk about things. You talk about things that happened before, and talk about things. And since these letters are written over several days, she might be talking about something that happened, several days after the date of the letter.
And they were written in, were they written in Yiddish or?
No, they were written in German.
In German,
And they were written in 2 different penmanship styles. One was the old penmanship version of Gothic, and that the penmanship version of Gothic, that changed over time, because different Gothic styles emerged. But she wrote her letters in a style called Kurrentschrift. But then in 1940, June 1940, the Nazis required everybody to write in Lateinschrift. And Lateinschrift is like modern, it's more like modern penmanship, and it was introduced in Germany years ago. And in my thinking, there's different theories behind this. There's too Jewish writing, Kurrentschrift was too Jewish. But I think, from my standpoint, and I have never been able to document this, but I believe that all the letters at that time, very shortly prior to that, all the letters were officially being censored. And so many of the people who, and they were going to Berlin. They were written in Vienna, but they went to Berlin. But a lot of the people who were conscripted or in the military could not read Kurrentschrift. So if you are censoring letters and you can't read what's in them, you're not going to be able to censor it.
Right.
So I think one of the major reasons this decision was made to switch to Kurrentschrift. Okay. So my grandmother, who had been writing in Kurrentschrift, and my grandmother's like 50, she's in I think mid-50s. She's written her whole life in Kurrentschrift. She all of a sudden starts writing in beautiful penmanship. I mean, you can read every word of it, because Kurrentschrift is very difficult to read. Right. But Latin. So that happened in 40.
And then you had to get the letters
translated.
Right.
So
I want to stop right there for you.
All right.
And I want to start with learning a little bit about how Betsy got started, and then we will come back to.
Yes. So none of this is genealogy, okay?
No, well, it is. I mean, it's
not yet.
It's your family history.
I think that's Betsy's point was a really good point.
Right. So Betsy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about the difference between genealogy and family history. I mean, to me, there's not much difference. But I got started actually when I was in high school and college. Because my mother's family is not Jewish. My mom was raised in western Kansas, very small town. Her family, parts of it were very well documented. And I had seen books about a couple of different branches of her family.
And what was your mom's, maiden name?
Yeah, my mom, my maiden name is Thal, but my mom's maiden name was Long. And the Long family, somebody had just published a book at that time, turned out to be not very accurate, but they had published it and I was impressed. And there was also an old book about the Price family, a German Brethren family. And I had seen both of those at my grandparents' house out in Kansas. And I was really impressed with those. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be interesting if somebody did something like that on the other side of my family? Because that was the family, the Jewish side was the most intriguing to me.
And that's your dad?
That's my dad's side.
And his last name was Thal?
Right, the Thal family. Mm-hmm. And I had not dug around at all. So I thought my initial initial thing that I really wanted to do was record what my grandparents knew, to discover what I could that they knew, so it wasn't forgotten. And because remember, we're talking about the 80s,
right? And
this was totally Soviet Union times, totally, there was no way I thought that there were any records. Mm-hmm. I wasn't ever going to find any records that were comparable to what my mother's family
So now
had.
Where did your father's family come from?
My father's family came from, half of it, his father's family came from Latvia, the Thal family. Mm-hmm. And his mother's family came from what's now Slovakia.
Okay, and was he born in the U.S. or was he born?
He was born here.
Okay.
And it was my great-grandparents' generation that came here.
And then where did he grow up?
He grew up in Toledo and Detroit.
Okay.
Mostly Toledo.
And then how did your parents meet?
Oh, that's a whole nother story. I can get.
Give me a brief.
Well, my mother was a professional church organist.
Oh, that's where you get your musical background.
Possibly, yes. And she had gotten a job she went to the University of Michigan. That's how she got east from Kansas. And she went to the University of Michigan, and after spending a couple years in France, she came back looking for a job, and she got a job at a church in Toledo. And then her parents, nice conservative Kansas parents, came in to help her look for an apartment. Well, while my mom was at work doing whatever she did at the church, they went looking for an apartment, and they found this apartment across the hall from my dad. And when they came to report to my mother that they had found an apartment, they said, we found a nice apartment, and we even talked to the guy across the hall, but we didn't get to meet his wife. Well, they were under the impression that he was married. Now, the joke was always in our family, if they had thought he was single, they probably would not have gotten my mother that apartment. But my father was across the hall, and he had a piano. He was a amateur pianist, and then, the rest is kind of history.
So, yeah. So a lot of this also, I mean, when you think about certain things, a lot of it is also fate and how people come together and whatnot.
Serendipity.
Okay,
Right.
so we're going to fast forward again, and you saw these books, and you were impressed,
Right.
and then you thought, okay, I'm going to do this about the Thal family.
Right. I want to dig in, and I want to find out, because I never had any hope of getting any records, I just want to find out what people know. That's all. I'll write it down, and then whatever.
Right.
And then I just got hooked. I was like, then they started giving me answers that didn't agree, and I had to
Right.
dig into, and I went to the library in Toledo and started looking at the censuses, and I remember when I first saw the census records, I thought, oh, well, I'm totally hooked now. So basically that's how I started, and I actually got my first computer. Again, I'm dating myself completely. I got my first computer because I wanted family history software. And it was so primitive. I mean, we're talking DOS,
Right. That was when you had the 3-point floppies. It wasn't-
Exactly.
yeah,
I
yeah,
flopped
yeah.
everything. So anyway, I was totally hooked. This was like grad school. And I have to also mention then, that I also had this mystery of my grandfather. We had a silver Kiddush cup in our family that my father had gotten from his father. My grandfather was still alive, but my grandfather had no idea there were 3 initials on it, let's say this. And my grandfather, I don't know who these initials are. My mother gave me this cup. So that was one of the mysteries that I had to solve. Well, as time passed, then, as I kept doing research now, there are tons of records from Latvia. There are tons of records from Slovakia, and they're all available. Not all, but they are incredibly increasingly available now, and I've been able to discover a huge amount about both sides of my father's family. So it's
Okay, so don't bury the lead. Whose initials were on the cup?
turned out to be, well, my grandfather's mother's family was Gettelson, so the initials were NHG, and so I had already kind of figured out it must be Gettelson. And my father's name is Norman, my grandfather's name is Norman. Well, it turned out that, let's see, how many Greek? My grandfather's mother was Clara, her father was Joseph, his father was Norman.
So this is your great, great, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Norman, or Nehemiah Hershef Gettelson.
Okay.
That was, his father was Hirsch, so that's the patronymic in the middle.
Okay.
So it was logical that my grandfather got the cup because that was who he's named after, but he had no idea. He did not remember that at all. So, and then coincidentally, then my daughter, we named her Naomi, and my married name is Gephart. So the initials kind of still work, but.
And so the idea is that if you started 30 years ago with your family, you probably have done a really comprehensive job about your family, right? The Thal family, or is there still constantly more stuff?
Oh, there's more stuff. I guess one of the reasons that I like genealogies and family history so much is that if you get tired or you get stuck somewhere, you can always go off on another branch. And I guess I've learned about myself that I'm not always so persistent. I'm not always so focused for long lengths of time. I just go off and, all right, I'll work on this side.
Right.
This is interesting.
You go down
now.
a different rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know that and you can never be done on any branch anyway, even if you are completely persistent. Somebody will always show up. For instance, I recently rejuvenated a website. I had a website years ago with my family information on it, and I've kind of rejuvenated because I discovered a whole branch of my family that way.
Well, and I told you that actually in Miami Beach, there are the Thal brothers.
That's right.
Who owned one of the best grocery stores called Epicure Market.
Right.
And I actually knew one of the brothers' children was a very good friend of mine growing up. So,
Okay,
and they're
yeah.
the Thal family.
Right.
And
And
there was a
there's-
large group of them in Miami Beach.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I tracked for a long time. There are 3 different Thal families from Latvia, Jewish Thal families. Among them, the family that the chess master Mikhail Tal belonged to. But they're not related, as far as we can tell. There's not any actual DNA connection or anything like
Right.
that. But I don't remember where I was going on that. But
You updated this website.
yeah, I
and-
updated my
yeah.
website and discovered years ago about somebody, a relative from Israel, saw my website and said, you know, my great-grandmother was a Thal, and here's how she fits in. And it was one of the siblings. I've always been trying to track the siblings of my great-great-grandfather, and because they spread out all over the world. I had no idea what happened to this woman, especially the women are very hard to track. And he gave me the whole history, and I discovered through that there are still relatives that I have in Latvia, and I was able to go visit them and they took me on a whole trip around Latvia to all the towns, and it was amazing. But that was all because I had that available online.
Right.
Now, of course, there's plenty of places now
Right.
to put your stuff up, but yeah, it really helps to have, you're never done because you never know who's going to show up and give you something else.
But what I think is so interesting is that so much of this relies on technology, yet both of you are sort of also using what a lot of people think is a very outdated type of product, which is publication. Because you said you're working on a book about your grandfather,
Right.
and you actually wrote a book, Irv. So I think it's interesting. And you also mentioned, Betsy, before we get back to you, Irv, that a lot of these types of books, because this is self-published, but of collecting the history or because they found letters or something, that people are writing these types of books. And I was asking, why do you think that this has become, I guess it's like really a personal family history memoir in a sense. Why do you think now, and why do you think that there is an interest in actually publishing something that's more of a narrative as opposed to just doing what most people would do, which is just aggregate the data and just keep it in a, format?
And not publish it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I think is because it's become so much easier.
Okay.
It's pretty easy to publish that, and I do, it's a whole nother subject, but I've been doing books now for my kids since they were 2, so we're getting on to like 16 years now. I do them for their birthdays every year, and it's also self-published through another company.
What kind of books?
They're all family history books, and of different kinds, and that's what this one with my grandfather is. It actually is, the core of it is based on some diaries that he kept when he and my grandmother traveled to New York in the 40s, and I think they're just hilarious. And so I transcribed those and annotated them, but then also added a biography of my grandfather. But they're all a variety of books.
Was this a way of you being disciplined about really writing all this down and saying you were going to...
That wasn't initially. I actually was trying, but it has become that. But initially, it's the same reason I think a lot of these books are being done, is that people want to share that information and have it. And that's one of the reasons that I do actual physical books, because I always feel like, okay, yeah, you can find the book in PDF form online, but you will have this physical book regardless of what happens to the world, what happens to technology, whatever develops. There's not going to be a corrupt file anywhere. You're going to actually have this book. And and I've also come to realize every day that, I made recordings of a lot of people in the height of my research time. This is not it, but when I was in grad school and single, I made a lot of...
How many of those people are still living?
Exactly. Most of them are gone. I never recorded my dad's parents because they were always in town with me. I don't know. I just didn't do it. And I didn't do a couple of other relatives that were in Toledo with me when I was growing up. And I always regret it. And so I feel like I'm left to share their stories. I'm it. Well,
Right.
my dad's still alive, but
Right.
I'm taking what he knows.
Right.
That's where their history is, and that's where I'm.
Yeah. Well, I sort of
responsible for
believe you
that.
have about one generation, and then you're forgotten because we all have those boxes of all these family, and you have no idea who's in these photos, and so I figure you get one generation, and then that's like what I always feel bad when I go to flea markets or and you see just these boxes of photographs, and you're like, that's somebody's family, and nobody knows. So
Well, and that's why I feel so responsible, because I know people in these photographs, partly because they were labeled by my grandparents,
Right.
but also because I've learned to recognize them. So then you start to feel like, well, I need to share this,
Right.
because I'm the one who knows.
Right.
My kids won't probably not care, and if somebody wants to know a generation or two from now,
Right.
that needs to be out there.
And there's also a very big emphasis about the history and legacy in Judaism, and that we do learn from our history, and the way that we sort of keep people with us is by memories and storytelling. So there is a very deep connection in Judaism about understanding and history, and then of the importance of family. So now, Irv, I'm going to turn back to you because, okay, so you found these letters and you got them translated.
Right.
Okay. And so you found out that they were from your grandmother to your mother, right? Is that correct?
They were from my grandmother as well as other people to my mother.
To your mother, okay.
Yeah, lots of other people.
And you said that they were a little bit of a stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
But what was the underlying sort of things that you were able to discover about both your family and because they were written, all these people were still living in Vienna at the
Right.
time, and what was going on with the Jews in Vienna?
Okay. Well, the first thing that I discovered is that I didn't know who the hell these people were.
And your mother
I'm growing up with these relatives, and I never heard who these people were.
Is that because the other problem that we have a lot with the Holocaust is that because when a lot of Holocaust survivors or the children of Holocaust survivors didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about their own experiences, or they didn't talk about what happened to their family. So a lot of this, and when people came to the United States, they really wanted to forget it. Did your mother not tell you?
My mother couldn't speak about her mother. What I recall, and I put this in the book, is that the few conversations I've had with her over the years, they lasted very short period, 30 seconds, 1 minute. She started talking about any one of her family members that perished. She fell apart. She became really emotionally disturbed, and that was the end of the conversation.
Did she ever talk to your father about it?
I'm sure they talked together about it. Because
and you never asked your dad?
He didn't talk about it. He was in Dachau and Buchenwald.
So he never talked about it either.
But here's what I know about Dachau and Buchenwald. My mother would say they worked him like a dog. That's it.
And they wanted to just move on and give you a better
End of
life.
the conversation.
Okay. All right.
And now I have a project now about my paternal grandparents. They left Vienna in July 1939. They somehow got to Portugal. I know where they went because I have their Reisepass, their passport. And in June 1941, they boarded a boat from Portugal to the States. What happened? What happened in between that time? Okay. I also found out. Well, I can go on and on, but that's not what you want to know.
Right.
Okay.
That's what Betsy said. That
Yeah.
you can never finish. You always
Right.
can go in different directions. Okay, but let's
but here's
focus
the point.
on this.
The point is that I identified these names, and then my initial goal was to find out who these people were and how am I related to them.
Okay.
And the second thing is what happened to them.
Okay, but what did the letters, because these letters were also sort of a time capsule
Yes.
of what was happening.
Right.
So what was it that you gleaned? Because, as we sit here and talk about this, one of the things with the Holocaust is, the reality of it is that in 10 years there will be no more survivors who can give that first person account. So these types of letters and things are actually still
primary
giving that
dockets,
voice.
that's primary research.
So what was it that you found out about what was happening to Jews in Vienna at the time that those letters were written?
Well, it was clear from the first letter, which was in September 1938, to the last letter in November 1941, that the conditions for Jews in Vienna were deteriorating. And my grandmother would talk about certain events that if you understood the historical context of those events, you would understand what was happening in Vienna. So I had to do quite a bit of extra research.
That's what I was going to ask you, yeah.
Yes, in fact, I had to read several books in German, completely in German.
So did you have to go, okay.
So my German has gotten better, by the way.
This is my whole point, too, is when you start going down these sort of rabbit holes, you start to have to, what people also have to realize, it's not just like about your family. So you had to learn German. You didn't speak German,
well, I
did you?
Well, yeah, for me it was a relearning of German. I actually, it was my understanding that I didn't speak any English till I was about 5.5 years old. I grew up in a Viennese household. They spoke Viennese, which is not quite the same thing as German, but it's a German dialect.
Right. So so you had to perfect your German.
Yes, I had to relearn my German.
And then you had to read several books on the history of the time period.
A couple of very good books, fortunately.
All right. And then were there things that you, because I know you also got the U.S. Holocaust Museum people involved to help you.
Well, one person, Betsy Anthony, and a little bit Megan Lewis, but mainly Betsy Anthony was.
And were they sort of captivated by the letters because did they find that it gave them insight or things that they maybe didn't know about what was happening, like a first account, or like you talked about that concentration camp that most people would, I mean, I've never heard of it.
Molly, it's an extermination camp. There was a concentration camp, but the part the really bad part was the extermination camp.
Right.
There was about 200,000 people were killed there, and about 60 to 70,000 were Jewish, and many were non-Jewish.
Right.
Many were, these were political political prisoners. This is the time of the Einsatzgruppen.
Okay.
And when they didn't shoot you, they were then, because they were killing people fast enough by bullets, so they started sending them to these locations, and they shot them there also, but then they started bringing in the gas vans, the portable gas vans. So this was a terrible place, but what happened is when the Russians started, when the German invasion of Russia failed, and the Russians started taking the offensive, the Germans, as they were pulling back from the east to the west, were destroying these camps. So Mali Trotzens was destroyed. But they have found enough information. So it's, not clear. I mean, I've heard numbers, which is 400,000 people were killed, but most of the numbers that I have heard about 200, from 200,000 people.
And really what else we have to think about is, the Germans.
It's a huge number.
But they also were so meticulous about what they were doing, and they wanted to really, take it as a historical record that they really kept very detailed records that you could find out where your family members went and
generally.
Yeah,
they had transport lists, and the Holocaust. There are these lists of transports, and they're pretty much intact, and that's how I found the date that my grandmother was deported. And I also found records at the date when she actually arrived, and they have records actually when she was killed. They don't have. There are records that have been lost, but there are enough records that they've been able to find, and they have found some records. And at least in the case of my grandmother,
you found out about your grandmother when she was deported and what happened to her.
Yes.
And then you said that there were these other names and people that in these letters. So who are these people that you found out about?
These are my uncles and my cousins, and once I started, up to now. We're not doing well, it depends what you define genealogy, okay?
This isn't relevant.
Okay.
To me, family history is genealogy.
Okay.
Because you are tracing your roots.
I'm doing research. I'm trying to figure out who these people are.
But to me, isn't that genealogy?
Yeah. Family history.
Well,
it's family history.
Yeah. But that's what I'm trying to find who they are, because I've discovered these people that I never heard of before.
Okay.
And who are they, and what happened to them,
Okay.
all right? So then I'm starting, then I begin the quest to find out, I say, what happened to them, and who first I find, I gradually over time, at the beginning, I didn't know who they were, and I made mistakes, okay? But over time, I got more and more records, and I found more records. And then Betsy Anthony was the program manager for the International Tracing Service, which is now called the Arlson Archives.
And that's part of the, is that part of the Holocaust?
No, well, it's not part, they have access. The Arlson Archives is a large repository of Holocaust related information on all different kinds of documents.
And these are that's something you would learn about and know that that's a resource through the society. Okay.
Well, and so I had Betsy was
so
program
she helped
manager.
you, right? So she helped you find.
She found these cards when the International Tracing Service was set up to be able to locate, to be able to find victims,
Right.
both victims and survivors from World War II. So there was all kinds of information in there if you know
Okay.
how to access it, but
Okay.
it was very arcane.
Right.
I mean, you had to
Okay.
really know how to do it.
Yeah.
And
So what
Betsy
did
was
you?
trained how to
So
do
let's.
it.
I mean, let's.
She found some of these relatives,
Okay.
many of the names of some of these relatives, and she also found out that some of them were alive.
Okay.
Some of them were dead, but some of them were alive. So once she found that out, my quest was, are they still living? And where are they?
Okay.
All right.
So how many did you find out? So how
Right,
many?
there's one now.
So there's one left, and
That's me.
you've been in contact with them.
Oh yeah, that's the story.
No, I know, but we don't. Our viewers don't
Okay,
have the
all
book,
right.
and so you found them, and then you connected with this. So while you were putting all this together, what was it that was the underlying sort of thing that you were thinking about, or what amazed you? Was it that you could put together your past and your family history? Was it that finding out what, all these people that nobody talked about, or
I wanted to know, I discovered a quarter of my family. I never heard of these people before. So for me, it became kind of a problem that it needed to be solved. I needed to find out who they were. And then once I did that, I wanted to find out, were they still alive so I could connect with them? Because they were family members that I had never heard of before, and I wanted to know who they were. So you lose a quarter of your family, and then of course I find out that many of these people were killed during the Holocaust, and so that's very tragic, and you can't do anything about that. So then that's when I started putting together the pieces,
Right.
the jigsaw puzzle.
And so explain about, you talked about the Stone of Remembrance.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that and how that related to
Okay.
your research and process.
Well, I'm going to step back one step further, because the Stone of Remembrance basically is based on the concept of the Stolpersteine. Stolpersteine was something that was started in Germany, and I believe it was started in Berlin probably several years, multiple years before Stone of Remembrance. And they were called Stolpersteine, stumbling stones, and they're mostly placed in the ground. They're like brass plaques, small brass plaques that are raised up over the level of the ground, and they're placed typically in front of the last known residence of a Holocaust victim.
in Vienna.
No, this is in Germany.
In Germany,
in
okay,
various
okay.
locations, mainly in Berlin, but other
Okay.
locations also. And the idea is when you walk around, you see these stones, you trip on them, and you realize that there's somebody lived there. Somebody lived there, and somebody was picked up and deported to someplace, and they were killed.
Right. And,
okay,
and there was
murdered.
also the connection of the idea of a stone is because in Judaism, when you go to visit the dead in the cemetery, you bring a stone to put on their marker to acknowledge and for remembrance.
Right,
So
but to me, it was a gravestone these people never had.
Right.
And because otherwise, if you don't put their names in a permanent location, they're gone forever.
Right. Well, it's sort of also like when you think about it, of all the people that came through Ellis Island, and they have all the names, and I mean, it recognizes people who came there and where,
So the Steine der Erinnerung was started several years later by her name is Dr. Hindler, and I corresponded with her, and then how I got to that point is another story. But basically, I found her. Okay. And then we met her, and we decided that we were gonna dedicate a stone of remembrance to my grandmother, because that was gonna be my grandmother's gravestone,
Right.
which she never had.
Right.
So then we had multiple emails.
So you
and
wanted
then
to you wanted to do a stone of remembrance
for
in
my
Vienna.
grandmother, right?
In Vienna.
In Vienna, right?
Okay,
And at her last, but this time I found out her last known address. I knew where she was deported from. I learned about Molly trust limits. I had the transport list.
Okay.
I didn't know everything that happened to her. I found that later on, but I knew that her last known place of residence was this street in the one part of Vienna, and she was put in the collection department, and she was deported from there, and that was her last known residence, and that's where I wanted to have the stone. And since then there's been, I mean, it's like they started off with just maybe a small number of stones. They had something called the Path of Remembrance that went through this one part of Vienna.
Right, because there was traditionally parts of cities that were traditionally Jewish.
Right.
But what's also, I'm sure you found this when you went to Latvia and visit people, that a lot of these small towns or cities, they still look like the streets and some of the buildings. They're like captured in time, although different people and stuff. So you really can actually go to the literal building. It's not even just knowing, okay, this was sort of the street. So to really be able to see, and then a lot of those streets are still the same cobblestone, or how are they? So they're actual streets that your grandmother walked on.
Some of them are. Vienna several had very severe bombarding from mainly the Russians, and so there have been many buildings in Vienna that are leveled. Well, the building that my mother lived before my grandmother was moved to this collection apartment, that's still intact, because that's near the Schönbrunn Palace, it turns out. So that's an area of Vienna which was more residential. It wasn't strategic.
Okay.
But where my grandmother was deported to, this one section was more in a commercial, had more economic significance, and it was bombed out pretty badly. So the streets were basically intact. And some of the buildings were intact, but this one building was destroyed and it was reconstructed.
So you did a stone of remembrance,
right in front of that building.
and then it's also been growing, the project.
Oh yeah, well now there's thousands. Now I think because as Betsy indicated, the desire now, because these people have died. There's such a concern about people forgetting who these people were and forgetting
again,
this whole concept.
Right.
So there's a lot more activity going on.
Right.
With relatives setting up these stones of remembrance.
Right, and again, that is also relating this back to the Judaism, is this idea that it was very important to take care of the dead and to remember them and to acknowledge them. And so what is it that when people say, oh, I'd like to learn more about my family, or maybe I should do this, what is it that both of you would want to tell people why they should do it, why it's important they should do it? And you both did it for very different purposes and reasons, but you both then started going in all different directions, because you also, Betsy, the project that you are working on for mapping in the database of the Fort Wayne Jewish community really has nothing to do with necessarily your personal family.
Right.
But you sort of felt that because of the fact also that Fort Wayne has the oldest congregation in Indiana, and also because even at its height, it wasn't a large, it was 1,200 people, but with the decline and the diminishment of the numbers of Jews here now, to record the presence and who they were and how deep their roots are. So you went off and now are doing a whole different project that has really not even personal. It is personal in terms of where you live. And then you're now going off and doing your father's side and that. So what is it that you tell people, or when they, think about it? And also we should know that you've been working on this for over 30 years, and this book took you 10 years. So this is not don't expect that you're going to find this and do this in 2 months.
No, you're
but
not.
what do you tell people about it? And what is it that you really enjoyed about finding out about your families?
Well, I love it as a way to learn history. I've always been interested in history. I didn't like school history because you just had to memorize dates and stuff. But to me, the process of doing family history research, and when you're actually looking at real records, passenger lists, census records, primary sources, that's fascinating to me. So I encourage people to do that. But no, it's not a short-term project. You can, Ancestry or all the other websites think, they kind of lead you to believe that you can find out everything in 5 minutes. You can find out just enough to get yourself hooked, probably, and that's what they're counting on. But that's my thing. But I also encourage people, when people ask me what they should do, always talk to the older relatives and record them. I am like a broken record when I say that. Always. That's the thing that you need to do. Yes, it would be great to identify the photographs that you have in your closet too, but I think the most important thing that anybody can do in terms of preserving family history and learning about it is to talk to people and record them. And it's so easy now to record people with technology that we have. There's really no excuse. Now you can Zoom them, even if you can't even be in the room with them. You can record. I talked to my aunt the other night, and now I have a recording. So, that's what I always tell people to do.
For me, I just wanted. My number one concern probably my main motivation for doing this is to leave something for somebody else to look at. Because you are where you came from, all right? At the end of the day, you can parse it any way you like, but it's your ancestors and what happened to them and how they got here plays a very, very important role in your life. And I know with my son and my daughter, they're interested, and my grandchildren are maybe interested. But so if you left them nothing, they wouldn't have anything to look at, okay? But at least now they have something to look at. And in my case, I grew up, my grandparents, we had a very small family that all lived together in New York City. They all came from Vienna, and they all wound up ending up, and this is not for other members, other parts of my family, this is very similar also. They all lived in the Upper West Side in New York City, and they lived in 2 apartments that were right next to each other. And this family was the family that I grew up with, okay? They brought me up.
Mm-hmm.
And so there wasn't a lot of them, and I remember them. And so I'm hoping, and in the case that, but I didn't know anything about anybody else.
Right.
So I'm hoping to pass some of that on, so there'll be something they can fall back, some historical information, so they kind of know it didn't happen by accident, okay?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I think that's an excellent point, that it does matter. Who you are matters, also where you came from, to create that understanding. So.
Right, and that's why like I talked about, I do these books, family history books for my kids. They're teenagers right now.
No.
Mostly they couldn't care less.
But when they have children,
right,
guarantee it. That's when they'll want to know. Yeah. So at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game. So Irv, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word, wow. My favorite color is blue, I know that.
Nope.
I would say being grateful.
Grateful?
Yeah.
Betsy?
I haven't the foggiest idea. I was going to say family, but...
Okay. What is your least favorite word?
Oh, God.
Betsy?
Honestly, family also is.
Okay,
when it's
right.
used-
Okay,
when
for
it's
different
used in a
reasons,
different
right?
context.
Irv, what's your least favorite
Okay.
word?
Oh, I'd say, I'm trying to put this in historical context.
It's one word.
Yeah, okay. I'd say maybe ungrateful.
Okay, all right.
And I can explain the
Okay,
reason
nope,
why.
nope. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally, Irv?
Just living the best I can.
Okay. Betsy,
Music.
what turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Really loud, ugly music. No,
Irv?
we're going to be embarrassed by this.
I think just lack of consideration for other people.
What sound or noise do you love?
What sound of noise?
What sound or noise do you love?
I like music.
Betsy,
Obviously, orchestra music.
what sound or noise do you hate?
Leaf blowers.
Irv,
Loud, screeching noises.
what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Well, I like history quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Betsy,
Yeah, that's. I always thought I would actually like to be a computer, like a programmer, but also like a professional genealogist. Two other.
what profession would you not like to try or do?
Oh, anything. Like a factory worker.
Irv,
Never really thought about that. What I wouldn't like to do. I guess I wouldn't like to something that doesn't result in anything. So it's not a question of menial.
right.
I can do menial task, okay, but it needs to something. It has to be like a positive accomplishment. It
Okay.
could be a menial task as long as it's a positive. So if it's something that doesn't have a positive accomplishment, I don't think I
Okay.
would want to do it.
Irv, what do you consider your greatest achievement?
My greatest achievement? I mean, is this a biological thing, or because I think my kids are probably the
Okay,
greatest achievement.
that's fine. Betsy?
Yeah, that's good. I like
Okay.
that one.
Betsy, this will be very appropriate. Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Oh gosh, any one of my ancestors, but I would probably say my great grandfather, my father's grandfather.
Irv?
Living, that's like, it could be 100 people, okay? I mean, it could be, I guess I wouldn't mind speaking to my grandmother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Irv, how would you like to die?
I would just like to just pass away. Old age.
Betsy?
Yeah, either in my sleep or
Yeah.
with family, just sudden heart attack, keel
Okay.
over.
And Betsy, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh, that's yeah. Welcome here. Your whole family is over here. You can go talk to them.
Irv?
Yeah, I'd say that you tried hard to be a good person.
Well, I want to thank Irv Adler and Betsy Gephart of the Northeast Indiana Jewish Genealogy Society for having a seat at our table and sharing just a little bit about your family's history and what you can do with genealogy. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank
very
you for having
much.
us.
And you can learn more about Ann Good Company and all the other great conversations we have had at anngoodcompany.info. And we look forward to next week when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.